here today, William Ramsey. You've heard him, you should have heard him a number of times on this show, and there's others out there, of course, that have done him. He has been with us with Randy and Gordon. He's been with Randy solo. So there's enough audio out there. If you want to hear more from William, just do a search on him, and he'll pop up at quite a few places and in my archives as well. There's a bit of a nettlesome subject, and that is the time he spent in the District of Columbia, which anybody could understand just with their working knowledge of that place. And I was there for 2 years with the Bureau, the FBI. It's probably one of the crappiest cities I've ever been in, but be that as it may, William, I mean, I know you got war stories and stuff, but there's a lot going on there, and there's a lot that you saw in the era in which you were very heavily involved with the District of Columbia. And what is that time period, by the way?
Well, I was there for law school between 95 to 98, so I was kind of there during, the latter parts. Well, actually, it was the latter parts of Clinton's first administration, and then the beginning parts of the second, and pretty much all the Lewinsky drama and all that. I was kind of right in the belly of the beast, so to speak.
Yeah, well, there's always interesting times there, and as I told you one day, I left the Bureau on any given work day, went down to catch the bus, and had to pass City Hall, and all of a sudden I heard these trumpets blare like you hear from like a Robin Hood movie. And I'm like, what is this? It's like 4:45 or something like that. I look across and there's the Queen coming out of the City Hall. Then I thought it was strange, but for other reasons. So, at any rate, you never know what's going to happen in the District of Columbia. Even the name itself is a little bit weird. All right. Why don't you tell us about your experiences and what has at least moved you to share them? Because as dark as they may be, that's just exactly what this is all about.
Yeah, I think that I just wanted to come on the record and kind of give my perspective on history of things that happened in the past. I was definitely not an insider by any means. I was just a kind of a naive guy who really didn't know much about Hollywood in the way. I mean, excuse me, that's a whole different story.
Yeah, but you know what? But there's a linkage there, so it's okay.
Okay, but D.C., so I was naive about that, and so when I got there and saw how it really worked, it was a pretty harrowing experience, how different it is from what is put forward on mainstream media or just the media in general. I just would like to impart to you and your listeners a different side or a different take on that city and how it really works.
Just want to let you know, folks, too, I mean, the website that William maintains will be up with the audio link, so you've already seen that. It's occult911.com. He did write Prophet of Evil, and that's out in a number of forms. It's a PDF. It's a softcover book. It's also it is now available in a DVD. Is that true?
Correct, and it's on video on demand. You can get it through Amazon.
Okay.
Both of my movies, you can buy a DVD, but they just have a very interesting little part of their website now that you can actually watch the videos on order for like $1.99, so it's pretty cool.
And he did not necessarily misspeak when he said Hollywood, because he has Occult Hollywood out in a DVD. It's a documentary, of course. Let's see, we got
Volume 2 is on the way,
okay,
so
good.
I should have that done within the next 3 months. So,
well,
I think that's just as interesting as the first one, hopefully.
Well, really, the reason I was kind of kidding with you when you said Hollywood, because to me, both the District and Hollywood deal in illusion.
Agreed.
I don't think there's any two ways about it. They're probably more joined at the hip than we understand. But going back to your experiences in D.C., what do you want to start us off with?
Well, I would just, I went out there to go to law school. I went to a law school in Northern Virginia, and I experienced things that I think are kind of important to a good understanding of Washington, D.C. and how it works. I answered an ad for a law clerk. After your first year, you typically want to find somebody to work for it so you can get experience. Well, the person who I answered the ad for that was at my law school was a alumni of that law school. His name was John Clark, and he was looking for somebody to, do some work for him. Well, it turns out John Clark was working on a case his client was by the name of Patrick Knowlton, who he was involved in a side issue involved with the death of Vince Foster. He had been to the park, Fort Marcy Park, and he had seen a couple things and that were very suspicious. There were cars being moved that were contradictory to the story of Vince Foster, and I just took his job without really knowing the full gravity and seriousness of what I was getting into. So he wasn't a white shoe lawyer by any means. He was a guy who was working back in those days close to Chinatown. This was before the basketball stadium had been built in D.C. And so we would go to his office, and I would just do low-level legal stuff for him. And what he was trying to do was kind of get public attention to the case and also contradict the public story of the Vince Foster murder, which was clearly a political murder. It was not a suicide at all. This guy, Vince Foster, was very sharp. He was first in his class at Vanderbilt. He was used to stresses of careers, and the excuses that they said of why he committed suicide were fully bogus, and most of the people that that knew him knew it was a bunch of baloney. Webster Hubble came out and said, "Don't believe it for a second that he was suicide," and then he changed his story after. I'm sure he got pressured into it. Anyway.
Well, didn't Hubble something happened with Hubble. Was he sent to prison for a little while to probably rethink what he said?
I think he got something for corruption. I mean, There was a lot of stuff with the Rose Law Firm. He was the head of the Rose Law Firm, and he was in Arkansas, and there was all kinds of allegations, if I recollect, about Rose Law Firm being involved in, working to hide the funds that were being made from MENA and a lot of the drug dealing that was taking place in Arkansas. So I don't know. I don't recollect the actual specifics of what he got in trouble for, but I think he got disbarred, if I remember correctly. I don't know.
In fact,
and he was. The funny thing was he was, I think, the head of the Supreme Court in Arkansas at one point. So he's a legitimate character. He wasn't, a slouch.
All right.
Well, as legitimate as Arkansas can be, I guess that's what I should say.
Yeah, well, another one of the fine luminaries like Albert Pike.
Yeah, really.
Well,
it's my understanding. I read recently that Rose Law Firm, at one point, and Rose Law Firm is where Vince Foster, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Webster Hubble, and all these guys were at. My understanding is, and I need to verify this, is that the Rose Law Firm at one point was interred at the Albert Pike House in Little Rock, Arkansas.
You cannot make this stuff up.
No, I can't make it up. No, it's from a book by a researcher. Oh, gosh, what's the name of that book? I read it and this is an interesting book. Let me go to my files here in just a moment.
No problem. I also, you just raised about 3 questions real quick, and I'll hold them off, but...
And this is a great book. Here it is. It's called The New Underworld Order, Triumph of Criminalism, Dark Actors Playing Games by Christopher Story.
Oh,
which is it's unfortunately he wrote it way too long. It's got 700 pages or something like that, but it's well worth a read. I'll actually send you a copy right now.
Oh, that's beautiful. I will say this. In the Civil War series that I'm still doing, I had addressed Albert Pike through an essay written by a professor, several of them which contributed essays to a book collated by some people at St. Leo University. It was called Divided We Fall. I think they did a really good job. They did it from a Confederate point of view, but they did it as, I think, objective and as analytical as possible. The thing they said about Pike was they stuck kind of more to the facts, and they said that, the guy really was pretty much a profiteer, if you would say, an opportunist. They kind of downplay his role with that rogue Indian band that supposedly, took scalps on behalf of the Confederacy. But it's interesting because they didn't want to go too deep into his other pursuits, I guess, and they just left it at that. Of course, to me, and I'm sure to you also, William, what he wrote, talking about tomes, Morals and Dogma, and that's a nasty piece of literature, which I'm sure they didn't want to get involved with. But
sure. I just read recently that that was based on works by Eliphas Levi or Alfred Lewis Constant, who was Aleister Crowley's favorite writer. Is my understanding, and I have to do the research to do the comparison between Morals and Dogma and the works of Alfred Lewis Constant or Eliphas Levi. But it's my understanding that he ripped off Alfred Lewis Constant like wholesale, like
that's our boy.
Pages.
Yep, that's Albert.
Yeah,
that's Albert's M.O.
Well, he could have gotten away with it because originally the works of Alfred Lewis Constant were all in French, so he probably just had it translated and then just ripped them off, for all I know. I really don't. I haven't confirmed that either.
This is a winsome question. I just want to ask you, have you ever read the works of Ambrose Bierce?
Yes.
The
Devil's Dictionary?
It would seem to me that the two of those would be great at cards, trying to cheat each other.
Oh, okay.
Now, you did go looking into your resources. You got what you wanted, is that?
Well, I'm just trying to, the book was The New Underworld Order that references the Rose Law Firm, so I'm just trying to find the actual quote here. I'm trying to do a quick search, but...
Also, look, if you're doing it, go ahead and do it. Let me just say this so that folks can be apprised a little bit of what happened with Hubble. I thought the guy died. He did not. But it said on June 30th, 1999, Hubble entered into a new plea agreement with Ken Starr, and that's another old story, resolving the second and third indictments against him. He pleaded guilty to 2 charges and was sentenced to 1 year's probation. In the prior November, he was indicted by Starr for a third time, this time for fraud and lying to the White House Banking Committee. In other words, he walked. He got a slap on the wrist, he got a finger in his face, and he's lucky to come away with his life if you know the Clintons.
Yeah, he was. So here's the quote from The New Underworld Order. This is by Christopher Story, who died after the book was published. I think he was an older guy, but you never know. Anyway, he says here, this is from page 448. It says, Pike developed these demonic plans, probably under satanic influence, at a mansion he built for himself located in Little Rock, the headquarters today of the Rose Law Firm, with which Mrs. Hillary Clinton, codenamed Queen Melusina, is associated. So I guess she's got a code name too. Who knows?
All right. Working back from what last you said to what you said earlier, that created some questions. What I find really interesting about this whole Kenneth Starr versus Bill Clinton thing is that it lasted as long as it did, really came up with very little, and also the two of them are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. That the whole thing was a shadow show.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I mean,
I think that it was kind of an elite message to Bill to back down, and they knew they weren't going to, get rid of him. I guess, he was close to being impeached. I mean, he got impeached in the Senate and not in the House. Is that right? If I recollect.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of drama there. He was close to getting punted. And the Starr report, if you look in the footnotes report footnotes are better than the actual report itself.
Yep.
They put some juicy details in there that they knew the public would never look at, but those details are that, Clinton, he wasn't just one girl, Lewinsky. He had 7 other girlfriends at the same time, and a lot of the perversions that were taking place in the Oval Office were a lot worse than the whole cigar story, but I won't relate those to you, but I would suggest if people really want some juicy details, go back and look at the footnotes.
Perhaps, without a doubt, the most disturbing element of Eyes Wide Shut was that scene at whatever mansion that was.
Right.
And yet, also, that is very accurate when you deal with, especially men, I have to say, let's call it what it is, who believe, as in what Joseph Conrad wrote about Heart of Darkness, that when you really have nothing over you, when there's nothing to in a sense, you're above the law, what do human beings tend to do? They become corrupt. And that scene is not fiction, unfortunately. And then you think of like the Hellfire Club and the Golden Showers Club and going back to Benjamin Franklin. So is it a real stretch to think that Billy wasn't messing around in that same fashion? No.
No, it's not a stretch at all.
No.
I mean, he worked his way through so many women. There were so many women that came forward, and there was a lot more that didn't, because they were afraid. Some of them came forward for their lives, but I think there was one lady whose husband died on a deserted road. He supposedly committed suicide, and there was like Juanita Broderick, which, I mean... That's just.
Well, did you watch the documentary, The Clinton Chronicles?
Yes.
All right. So you understand? I mean, if anybody has a doubt about this, and of course, William and myself, I don't believe, William, you are at all a partisan political follower. This is just what powerful people do. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I used to be. I mean, I was
Yeah,
when
so
I
was
was
I.
naive and kind of a more provincial person before I went to D.C. I'm ashamed and embarrassed to say, but I was a Republican. You know, I was like, this is like the people who supported the Constitution, and they presented themselves as people who were trying to support the law, and I just realized it was all baloney. You know, and then once I did that, now both parties are just a two-headed duopoly of monstrosity. You know, it's
a Punch and Judy show to keep your eyes off the real handler.
Yeah, for sure.
But folks, I tell you what, you might even be able to see this on YouTube and Google. I mean, I don't know. I never tried, but now that I think of it, I mean, I had the DVD, and I thought it was absolutely rapting. The two things that struck me real quick, Bill, and that is the Bureau, the Arkansas Bureau of Investigation officers who were being interviewed, and they kind of looked wistfully in the camera, you know, almost like they still don't believe it to this day. But they said, you know, we had everything on him when he was governor, and somehow, some way, he got away.
Right.
And I mean the way they looked at it, it's like, you know, what am I going to tell you? We had him dead to rights. How did he get away? The other thing is, there's a very attractive woman in there. So I guess she's in her 50s by now, who was in that close coterie around Clinton.
Right.
And they interview her, if you remember, throughout the DVD. And at one point, this is pretty good videography. She talks about how she was threatened that if she ever talked about what took place, she'd land up in jail. And if you remember, the camera pulls back. She's got on like an orange jumpsuit and his barbed wire behind her.
Geez.
And she goes, and here I am.
Yeah, I vaguely remember.
Remember that?
Yeah.
Oh, man, that hit me. So anyway, you don't have to take our words for it. Go take a look, folks, at that documentary and argue with me. Even if you're like entrenched Democrat idiots, take a look at that and tell me that guy wasn't greased. I mean, come on. Give me a break. Now, all right, we talked about the Council of Foreign Relations. The two of them are in it. They can't possibly be at their throats and be sitting like lambs in the CFR. Impossible.
Yeah, no way.
Now, I want to backtrack to one other thing. I checked this thing out, and it seems like it is true. Do you want to tell us at all, if you know anything, about the person who was in charge the night of the supposed suicide of Foster, who was working for the National Reconnaissance Office?
I didn't hear anything about that. I think you and I had talked about that in the past, but I'm not familiar with that story. Please tell me about it.
No, I mean, because this backs up exactly what you said, and I had heard that whoever was, well, the gentleman that was working the shift that night, that was at least the supervisor, apparently they saw something from a bird that was anomalous on the White House lawn. And he called it him being dutiful, and he wound up dead. And I went to all right, so that's the story. Okay, do I believe it? Yeah, maybe. But I went to the National Reconnaissance website, and this is like maybe 2-3 years ago. And there's kind of a page for him in memoriam because he died of an unsolved murder.
Wow.
And that's the truth. I'm telling you straight. So I don't know if it's still up there, but when I went to that site, I think it's nro.gov. I have no idea. Anybody can find it. But what I found so strange was that gentleman had a memoriam to him of an unsolved murder. That's all I need to know.
Well, you know, that's the way these operations work. When they really want to off somebody, they don't just off that person. They off whoever's around there who saw the crime and who can testify to the real story. So, you know, there's the same thing that happened when they killed Princess Diana. It's like a whole bunch of other people started dying and getting burned out in cars and, you know.
Oh, yeah.
The method of operation.
Well, I mean, I was there in the 70s, and I think everybody's kind of on their best behavior to a certain degree because Nixon had gotten spanked and sent out of D.C.
Right.
And so you had a whole lot of temporary people in the Bureau, and I mean, in everything, well, in the Bureau too, but I mean, in D.C., and it was kind of, I guess, a time of regrouping and tightening up. But it would seem to me, I mean, as much as we know about Kennedy's, JFK's assignations and such, they still seem to be somewhat, I don't know, kind of controlled by some kind of understanding, some civility. However, Crazy Billy, I mean, I'm wondering what they had to do in D.C. to make sure a lot of this stuff didn't happen. He just ran amok, it seemed to me.
Oh yeah, I mean there were so many people dying, and I mean it was crazy when I was out there for that time. And you know, everybody kind of knew too that strange things were happening, and you know, everybody. I just remember myself saying back then, you know, I'm not suicidal. I wanted everybody to know because, you know, people were turning up suicided. So, you know, you just want to make sure that everybody around you know you're never going to commit suicide, so that they can't come up with stories. And you know, a lot of people don't know that D.C. is just it's a swamp in more ways than one. I mean, it was built on a swamp, but it's a swamp of like intelligence agents, assassins, and intrigue, like you can't even believe. I mean, it's unreal.
There's a reason why it's below sea level. But I'll tell you another thing to share with you about him. There's a Christian woman out in Nebraska who was former Air Force, and she was in Europe, and she got a chance to meet Clinton. So she actually bit on what everybody bites on in America. I mean, have you ever seen a president that wasn't Christian? You know what I mean?
No.
Right. They're all Christian. Okay.
Right.
Now,
sure.
She said that she's in a line where he's going down to meet the troops and such, and she claims, and there's something more to this also. She said that she shook his hand, said, you know, praise God and all this other stuff, and Clinton looked at her and went like, yeah, right, and just kept on going. Now, we don't have a hard time believing that, but here's what shook her up, and that was she was supposed to be in the crew that flew, all right, help me out with here, Ron
Brown, right?
Right, to his destination.
And Croatia or wherever the truck crashed, right?
And her crew was bumped, and they said no. They're giving it to a crew, I guess, that was more favored because it was like a high-profile thing, and so they had to step down. And of course, you know what you know. Right. And she said the same thing. She said all the skinny was that he was killed. And there's another.
And there was actually, my understanding was there was a couple of survivors, and they greased them too to make sure that there was nobody talking.
It was reported that one was alive on the way down, and she might have told me this. Whether it's the reaccounts or what she had said to me. She said one was alive and well on the way down. I think it might have been a female, and by the time she got to the bottom of the mountain, she was dead.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you could say, okay, look, she expired. I understand that, but in a situation like that. Yeah, I mean, it actually begat the thing we all kid about in a gallows humor sort of way, and that is, oh, you mean suicided with 3 self-inflicted gunshot wounds?
Right.
Right, we got it. All right, so anyway, and Billy had a long line on that kind of behavior. Let me ask you this. I don't know if you want to say it or not, but did you go to George Mason Law?
I don't want to say it.
Okay, don't. It's all right, and the reason I say that is because in the 70s, one of the things you find out when you work in D.C., and I think you'll bear witness to this without a doubt. And I was in the FBI, and we were low level, we just grunts, in the basement, working on gas and oil bills incurred by the agents. But whatever, you would hear rumors, but the rumors turned out to be good information. So you realized that either deliberately or just because human beings see things, and it's usually secretaries who type stuff up and tell their boyfriends in a moment of amor about the way things really are. That's the kind of stuff that we would hear all the time in the Bureau, and it would turn out to be true. So, a lot of skinny that you hear around D.C., you really have no problem believing that it's probably one way or the other going to turn out to be true. One of the things that we heard was that the Bureau was going to start hiring. Remember, this is 76. Right. Females and minorities. So they had a fast track. Of course, there's no such thing as that, but, there you go. The other thing was that if anybody went to get an accounting or a law degree, they did not have to pass the bar, but if they got an accounting or a law degree, they would get fast-tracked as well. Well, there was no way in the world I was going to get an accounting or a law degree. A couple of close people to me who have now since retired the Bureau quickly went to the nearest school they could go to and got that accounting degree. And one of the schools that was preferred by them, I guess because of night classes, was George Mason. That's the only reason I ask you, because a lot of the guys that I was with at that time went to George Mason. And
it was comfortable. They have a great night school program. They have it's a commuter campus. Their real campus is farther south, but they have one right across the Key Bridge.
Right, exactly.
In Clarendon, I think it's still.
And at that time also.
It was favored. It's a very right-wing school, right-wing area, and they like to to recruit out of there for intelligence jobs.
Also, I believe that they might have used as a satellite in those days Northern Virginia Community College. I think that rings a bell now as I think of it. But anyway, all right, you don't want to talk about it, and that's cool. But at any rate, that's what was going on in those days. But I bring this up also because, again, just like you know, when stuff starts getting circulated, usually it's true.
Right, yeah. The other thing that I learned when I went to D.C. is everybody knew everything. I was a naive, ostensible, kind of a stupid provincial, really. I believed everything I learned in high school. I, thought the media was honest.
Yep.
I mean, I'm embarrassed to say that, but, when I got there and, really started reading, and this is like right when the Internet was coming around, and I'm a curious person, so I would read, documents on the Internet. I was like, once I started working for Clark and, I found out about Vince Foster, that like opened my eyes to a whole bunch of other stuff that happened in the past. And, by the way, that's when I kind of came across Mike Rivero's site. He had one called Rancho Run Amucka, and he focused a lot on, the bogus stories of Vince Foster. So that's kind of, I've been a reader of what really happened for like 15 years now, back before it was what really happened. But everybody knew that Kennedy, when I got to Washington, they knew Kennedy had been killed by the government and Robert Kennedy. Mm-hmm. They all know, and they don't talk about it. It's all kept quiet, and people just, keep their mouth shut, and they know that, they're in trouble if they go and, tell the truth about these events. Their careers will be jeopardized. Their lives will be jeopardized in that city.
But you see,
because there's so much, weight placed upon maintaining that lie. And I didn't understand that. And once I got there, I was like, oh, so this is really how it works. Because, like I said, everybody knows. They all know. They just don't talk.
But you see, you bring up a good point. And those who naysay let's face it. The world runs by conspiracies. Let's not be, you're not naive about it.
Absolutely.
Right.
If you don't think there's conspiracies, you don't know. I'm not saying you individually, but a person doesn't know anything about history. Because all of history is fraught with conspiracy. And it's disgusting to think that that there's Christians out there who will naysay these types of realities, because the entirety of the New Testament is conspiratorial. And it's a subtext that's not emphasized because you're trying, it's basically a proof of the divinity and messiahship of Jesus Christ. But the whole, Mary had to go to Egypt. She, Herod was trying to kill all the kids in Bethlehem. Christ's first, public preaching, they went after him. And then they conspired to put him on the cross. So it's an absurdity to, have this conspiracy theory. The whole word conspiracy theory is a joke, because at least what I talk about, I back up with evidence. So, and a lot of other people do. So if anybody even bandies about that bogus phrase, they should really go check themselves. Sorry.
Interesting. No, I love that kind of stuff. This is Rand Central. So,
all right.
No, but you're right. And a couple of things also, and that is, it was foretold, but the way in which it happened, and the group of people who instigated and made sure it happened, I'm talking about the crucifixion of Christ, it couldn't have been more perfect as far as what Christ was trying to point out, because he could have, He wagged his finger in the faces of the Sadducees and the Pharisees. He raised people from the dead. He healed the sick. He gave sight to the blind. He changed water into wine. But 3 days after chasing the bankers out of the temple, guess what?
Right.
He was in front of Pilate. And there's a message there for everybody.
Indeed.
And as you well realize, too, that the two groups of people, I guess professions you would say, that Christ had the most vituperous words for were bankers and lawyers. So,
and it's deserved.
Yeah,
I have a law degree. I'm a member of the State Bar of California. I do not practice law. I can't stand it. So
no, but
I learned my lesson the hard way.
Yeah, and there were plenty of good bankers and lawyers out there. We know that. But
they don't practice anymore because they all want to get out. You'd be surprised how many lawyers hate their profession. It's in like at least a third to a half. They just felt like they went through 3 years of torture to learn about it, and then they woke up and said, "Oh my God, now I'm stuck in this career." So
interesting that you should say that, because the former partner of mine in the show, Harry Spencer, his father-in-law is a long-time legal person and judge up in Georgia, I guess around Albany, Georgia. But he had done some lectures. They wound up on YouTube. Harry sent them to me. He goes, I don't have to tell you what he's telling these people. And that's exactly what he's saying, William. He's like, it's a different world now, in the legal profession, without a doubt.
Yeah.
But
it's sad. It's too bad, really.
Well, but again, I mean, this is interesting because at the same time, I'm getting hit with a lot of emails. I mean, it just happens like this. You don't really know what's going to take place, but you can almost see a collective pulse in any group, and those who listen to the show and understand what we're all saying about the whole thing about America's in a myth. It's okay because that's the way things are done. That there are conspiracies without a doubt. But everybody's lamenting the fact that it's too bad, but this is the world that was created by the evil one, and the Lord knew we'd have to live in it, and we'll be okay. But you're not going to get victories by trying to punch out bad people and overthrowing the government. I mean, it's just, it's not going to work. The thing is to actually thrive and not be of it, though you may be in it. And a lot of people are writing and they're frustrated. Isn't there some way we can give a black eye to the NWO? Well, no, there isn't. But you can't steal souls from Satan, and that's okay. That's why we're here. So at any rate. But conspiracy, let's say this. One, Harry Truman had a great quote. He said, the only thing new is the history you don't know about. Now, Harry, the good old 33rd degree Freemason, knew what he was talking about. I think that's a great quote. And I ripped it, and we put it on mugs, and I did a little change to say the only conspiracy you don't know. What is it? The only, oh, Lord, what is it now? The only conspiracy. The only conspiracy is the history you don't know about. So thank you, Harry, for that, because it's true. And one of the interesting things I found going back into the microfiche for newspapers and magazines is there was, I think it was a Newsweek book review, which just absolutely blasted these two guys for writing this book, The Invisible in Government, which was about the Bay of Pigs and all this other stuff. But anyway, they were seen as being traitors, and they were called conspiracy theorists. 1964. Right. But that was birthed out of the Kennedy assassination, which got me off on this rant. And that's where we're going with this. Since the time people thought that assassination stunk when it happened, you had to have this demonizing of anybody who talked about something other than what was in the mainstream, correct?
Right, correct.
So you're absolutely right. There are conspiracies. They're not theories. They're facts.
Certainly.
But you've also just told us here, about how you can keep something so big so quiet. I mean, isn't it the story first? They threaten your job, they'll threaten your pension, or they start sending you photographs of your wife and kids at the supermarket.
Yeah, or blackmail you, or follow you. You'd be surprised. I mean, there's more to the story about me and John Clark and Patrick Knowlton, but I mean, I saw what happened to Patrick Knowlton, and I know what happened to me. So, it's real, and it's surreal, and it's also it's at least back then when you didn't have the internet to verify and basically back up facts, but it's a very alienating event because most people don't believe that it happens or that it can be happened. So the harassment by the police state is assumed to be a phantasm in your mind, so they view you as crazy, and they also don't want to address these difficulties. They'd much rather be compartmentalized and stay in their own safe space instead of addressing these kind of abuses. So
you're listening to William Ramsey, and his website is occult911.com. You see it there with the links as well with this audio. He's been on to speak to a number of things. Prophet of Evil. I tell you what, that was your first work, and that's an opus right there and then. And he also has Occult Hollywood, which is in a DVD form. Aleister Crowley, Prophet of Evil. I got to tell you, thank you very much for sending me that link about, was it George Varick? Remember?
George Barrett.
Varick. Do you remember he had some doings with Aleister Crowley during World War II? The reason I bring him up is because he's...
Oh, Virek.
Virek,
yeah.
You call him? Okay.
Sorry, I heard it.
My fault.
Sorry.
I'm from Jersey. These things happen. Okay. But what was so interesting is I'm reading about Virek.
Virek, yeah. Viereck.
Right.
He was the German propagandist for the International and the Fatherland, I think.
That's right. But he also was somebody who was trying to get the, I guess you don't want to call them announcements, but warnings, whatever you want to call it, from Germany saying, look, don't put people in Lusitania and send her over, because we know you've got munitions and stores in there. And okay, look, we're gonna play it by the rules. And of course, only one paper wrote it, actually ran it here. Varick was trying to get it in all like some 50 major U.S. dailies. Didn't happen. Wilson didn't say a word. And and I guess we were wondering out loud or whatever, but you actually could connect him with having dealings with Crowley. Not that they were in league necessarily, is that correct? But that Crowley was a spy.
No, not at all.
Right.
Crowley was not in league with Varick. Crowley was more than likely, and the evidence is kind of scarce, but he's more than likely an agent for the British government,
right.
A very, sidelined agent, but he was in contact with a lot of intelligence agents. He worked for Varick as a kind of a mole
right.
in his operation against the Germans.
Right,
Crowley, strangely, was a real English loyalist, and there's no way he could have worked for Varick as a true propagandist right. against the English and be allowed back into England. So,
yeah, good point. So here's a point in time when the all-time bad guy Crowley has some dealings with Varick, and although Varick tried to actually, I don't want to say broker peace, but make people understand, you can't keep doing this, and we're going to play by the real rules of war, which, by the way, everybody observed in a sense, and that the Germans were not animals for what happened. But what's interesting also is that William Jennings Bryan, and I think you remember I told you about this, was trying to get this word out, and he was having problems with Robert Lansing, who eventually stole his job as Secretary of State, no big deal. And Lansing turns out to be the uncle of, guess who? The Dulles brothers. Isn't that great?
Oh, my God.
It's the best.
Well, you can't make that up.
I can't. So what happens is Bryan is basically muffled. The whole situation happens, and Bryan resigns. And actually, through history, I'm looking at this guy as not being that bad a character. So, but there's...
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the Dulles brothers. Their white shoe law firm was Sullivan and Cromwell in New York City, and they were... there with John J. McCloy, who Alan Dulles was on the Warren Commission with. So it was Alan Dulles, John J. McCloy. I mean, it's just a total fixed job. And when I was in law school, one of my professors, very hard right-wing guy, was a former partner from Sullivan and Cromwell.
What do you think about that? It's unbelievable.
I cannot make this up. I'm not making this up.
Again,
and he spouted a lot of their positions. I mean, that is like about as hardcore WASP power center as you could probably get on the East Coast with Sullivan and Cromwell. It used to be. They've changed a lot. A lot of the principles from back then have passed away, and the character of the organizations are never really stagnant, or static.
If we can move on to another
sure.
Bullet point in the itinerary that you sent me. One of the things that Christians go back and forth about seems to be a lightning rod for good reason, for all kinds of criticism and questions, and that is Shackley.
Right.
Do you want to tell us about good old Ted?
Well, I never met Ted Shackley, but, he was called the Blonde Ghost. He was a CIA agent, operated in Operation Phoenix, but, when we would go out drinking, we'd go to Georgetown, or there's a place called the Third Edition, and, I had a lot of different friends of different stripes, and there were a lot of people from my hometown in D.C., but we would go out, and one of my buddy's friends was Ted Shackley's daughter, and she was a really very attractive woman, and the interesting thing about that is she worked for ExxonMobil, but she didn't really work for them. She had a job there. She had a black Exxon credit card that she could charge whatever she wanted, and so essentially everybody wanted to go out drinking with her because
Absolutely.
She would just cover the tab, and it would be covered by the oil company. So Ted must have done some really good work for the oil giant. And that's what happens to a lot of these, and what happens I'm much more familiar with a lot of these intelligence guys, but once they leave the office, they never really leave, but a lot of times they start their own, what they call a consulting business, and they name it some kind of, funny name like Global Investment Partners, Global, consultancy, or, something really vague. But essentially what they do is juice the whole system for big corporations. So they ensure that international, money can go to Nigeria or Liberia or Kuala Lumpur and make sure that the politicians get paid off, that the business keeps going, that, upstart communists get killed, and, all these things happen. And, nobody really knows what's going on. That's really what Ted Shackley did when he was done, working for the government.
I know this would have been a big deal for you because at that time, I don't know if you knew the Lord, and I kind of think you did, and I know I didn't when I was down there. But did anything ever rise up about the CNP, the Council on National Policy?
I have a vague familiarity with it. Isn't that like a right-wing
Christian thing? Yeah.
Christian thing. I didn't. I wasn't. I was. As a lawyer, what was the group that I was involved in? It was called. Oh Lord, my memory is just not. I was involved with like a right-wing legal group, and we go and see the Supreme Court justice. What was the black guy's name? Oh God.
Are you talking about Jordan?
What?
You're not talking about Burton.
Not Burton Jordan, the Supreme Court justice who got busted for the porn movies.
Oh yeah, that's right, Clarence
Thomas. So we saw Clarence Thomas at the Mayflower Hotel, and he had like literally a 10-minute standing ovation by all these right-wingers. It was so bizarre. I wish I could have had it on tape. I mean, these people just wouldn't sit down. It was unreal.
Was Sidney Biddle around in those days?
Sidney Biddle, I don't know.
That was the Mayflower Madam, wasn't it? Sidney Biddle Barrows or something like that? I don't know. They all got three names.
I think that it had already happened, but the Mayflower is interesting. I'd eaten there a couple of times with my, back then, my girlfriend who's now my wife, but the Mayflower Hotel is off of Connecticut. It's close to the White House. It's in between, on the way from the White House to DuPont Circle. I used to live close to DuPont Circle when I first moved out. They called it the Fruit Loop because that's where all the gay people live. But the Mayflower Hotel runs on an east-west axis, and there's a central hall that runs from the check-in to the back of the whole building. And if you're there, you can just watch the high-class prostitutes just stroll like it was out on a street corner or something like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was unreal. And I think I ate there at like 5 or 6, and we just sat there and watched them walk by. I mean, it's probably 5, within an hour. And you could just tell.
Sure.
I mean, it was obvious. They're alone, very, well-dressed, a little bit too, revealing, but classy. But still, you could just go, this person's out of place, not with somebody, not with kids.
As we would say, just something, just a little something you threw on, honey, to come out for dinner tonight. And I'm assuming they had no problems getting busted either. Well, what a surprise.
I think that they just look the other way. I think that the cops are in on it, and they just, they know what's happening. They know what happens, and those are allowed. There's parts of there's this part in northern D.C. where D.C. is broken up into sections, and those sections are overseen by certain jurisdictions of cops, but there was a corner where they all met. It was kind of like a four corners, almost like the states. Mm-hmm. And the prostitutes, that's where they would congregate, so they just walk from one jurisdiction to the next, and walk in between each police jurisdiction, so that if they saw the cops coming, they just crossed the street and the cops wouldn't bust them. I mean, it's unreal.
Well, not to make too much hay about this, but I mean, the FBI building, the Hoover building's on 14th in Pennsylvania. And I thought 14th or 12th was one of the red light districts, but not of the same caliber, that you're talking about.
I think it's changed. That was back then, and things have moved. That whole area over there, after they put in the new stadium, it's apparently really high class right now and real nice. It wasn't back when I was there 15 years ago.
All right, so imminent domain strikes again and upscales the area, huh?
Yeah, for sure. They went through. I mean, Chinatown was in a seedy part of D.C. back then, and now it's not. It's real high class.
One last thing I just want to ask you, because Jeff Long once in a while goes there to drink to my memory. But I used to go to the Hawk and Dove. You remember that place?
Hawk and Dove. It sounds familiar. I've been to. Sadly, I had to admit.
That's okay. Well,
at
we
least
were there.
Back then, I used to go to quite a few. I used to spend time in Georgetown because I could just walk across the Key Bridge. I lived in Northern Virginia, so I just walked across the Key Bridge. But Hawk and Dove.
The Hawk and Dove, if I remember correctly, if you're walking west right to the Capitol, you'd go to the right of the Capitol, which I guess would be a little northwest of it, and it was right in that area. I would be surprised if you didn't go there because it was just so convenient. And my buddy and I, who was also with the Bureau for the time that we were there, and I moved from Alexandria to Laurel, and we used to go to Union Station to catch a train to go up to Laurel. But we used to go there every so often, so I know it's kind of up in there on the hill. But
no, I've been to the Hawk and Dove. Yeah, I have. They have a pool table in the back. Yeah, I know exactly where that is. I used to work by there when I wasn't one of the privileged few who had all his expenses covered, but I used to work south of the Capitol, and there was a Mexican restaurant there that I'm not sure if it's still there, but I waited tables, and I'd see all these guys come in who were television reporters and all this other stuff. It was called Tortilla Coast.
Oh, really?
It's on the corner. Yeah, I'm looking at it. It's near
Bull
Feathers. You remember Bull Feathers Bar?
The name, yes, but never been there. No, I've heard that, but yeah. No, the Hawk and Dove.
Well, and I have an interesting story about Tortilla Coast. There was a guy from your neck of the woods, Florida, and I didn't know he was a congressman, but this guy would come in for lunch and order like two glasses of Scotch on the rocks, 3 fingers worth, and we just, God, man, this guy is really drinking hard. Well, it turns out the guy was a congressman from Central Florida, so we did some research on him to try to figure out, where he was from. His picture looked like this upstanding guy, but if you saw him in Tortilla Coast, I mean, he had the sweaty face of a drunk, like his nose would sweat, and I mean, he was drinking all day. It was incredible.
Our tax dollars hard at work.
What they must have done is, every time he had to go back to Florida, they must have just made him dry out and clean him up and put some makeup on and go back and press the flesh and smile and con him for another 2 years.
Works every time.
Yeah.
So, all right. But as far as Shackley goes, the story is.
Well, I just thought it was interesting an interesting vignette because his daughter just had carte blanche with this credit card with ExxonMobil, and she didn't do any work. She was like a consultant, but I think
Yeah,
it was amazing.
You can reach between the lines there. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing is, she'd run up $100-$200 bills and just smile and laugh the whole time. She wasn't. People get nervous when other people are usually spending their money, but she didn't give a rat's butt.
Before we move on to your thoughts about the presidential inauguration of '96, if that's okay.
Yeah. So.
Here's one thing I want to ask you, because you're out in California.
Right.
I thought this thing was stunk from day one. This started before I actually realized what was going on, and it continued through to just, I guess, last year. And that is, there's something that doesn't make any sense to me, because I remember the first reports about this and the way that they've kind of like been forgotten about. And that is, real quickly, the death of Chandra Levy.
Right.
Now, if you remember in the very beginning, the story was that she had left her belongings in the house as if somebody had called her and said, look, just run down real quick, I want to talk to you. And that she trusted the person who might have called her. Then later on through the years, of course, it turned out to be, well, she was out jogging. Now They got a guy that's been fingered for the murder, who interestingly is out in your state in the penal system, and not very far from where the Levies live, the mother and father.
Right.
The reason I'm going to go here in case you want to pitch in on this, and that is, one, the whole thing stunk. They supposedly had combed the park in which they finally found her bones the second time around.
Right.
And what was really interesting is Mrs. Levy, who is the one of the two. It always seems to be the wife, not the husband, or the mother, not the father, who has like this, I guess, exchange all the time with media. But Mrs. Levy said, I think something to the effect of, well, it's over, but it doesn't really bring closure.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting because it was a jailhouse supposed confession that banged this guy who happens to be out there now, who supposedly was in D.C. and committed this murder. Do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, because, this whole thing...
Well, I had done, I looked into it, and the whole thing is baloney. I don't think that guy did it. I remember the part of the story that, I think it was Rock Creek Park where she was supposedly jogging.
Right.
And, I mean, they did some Condit is just a monster. That was a guy who supposedly did it. And I know they combed over. There's a much deeper story there because they combed over his apartment, and there was, it's pretty grotesque, but there was something in his closet that they found that they weren't comfortable disclosing to the public, and I don't really want to talk about. But there was also it's clear that they were having sex parties at that apartment, because there was evidentiary proof that other men had been there and using it. And that's also kind of the story of a lot of these guys. They all pool money together and rent apartments. I don't know if it was this might be kind of different than what happened with Condit, but they rent apartments so they can go party and cheat on their wives and nobody knows about it. And Condit was married, so he's clearly playing the field, and there's a lot more to that story.
Yeah, there is, and this sounds strange. Understand something, that they made a movie about this with Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine called The Apartment. And my sister worked for General Motors in New York, and she told me that in fact that kind of thing happens. Where they have, like, what do you want to call it, the Joy apartment or the Whoopee room? You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's what happens all the time. Now, the only thing I thought about Condit was that I thought he might have been used as a foil to get her out because she trusted him, but someone else snuffed her because of what she knew. And of course, the story goes back to the fact that did she know where Carlos Lederer, the one of the Colombian drug traffickers, disappeared from the penal system? She was also supposedly the one who had arranged media for the quote execution of Timothy McVeigh. You've heard that kind of stuff, haven't you?
Chandra Levy was associated with that?
She was supposedly an intern in the Bureau of Prisons.
Okay. So, no, I didn't get all that. My understanding is why the rationale or the motive was that she was a little too cloying with Condit. He told her a whole bunch of lies that she believed. She was young and naive. That's my understanding. But
Okay, but all right, that's fair enough. But I'm thinking that to kill somebody, they must have some knowledge of something. Are you thinking that was a direct threat to Condit?
Yeah, because I think that there was other things going on other than her and Condit, and she knew too much, just like Palfrey, the D.C. madam they had hung.
Oh, down here, by the way.
Yeah, she was clearly killed for knowing too much. She didn't know she knew a lot about a lot of powerful people, and I'm sure a lot of those powerful people said, let's get somebody on the task, and that was it.
To his credit, Alex Jones did an interview with her, and just like you had said before, you saying, I'm not suicidal, I'm okay, she did the same thing on his show.
Yep.
So for that, I'll give him credit. And what happened was she wound up found hanged in a shed outside her mother's house.
Yeah, and women don't hang themselves. They usually take pills and get into bed.
Yeah, good point.
They don't do no violent stuff, generally, if they want to kill themselves.
No, that's a very good point. I had to do research one time about adolescents at risk and other things, and it turns out you're absolutely right. Males will do it by firearms mostly, and the more grotesque things. Right. Females are very, by the numbers, they are 66%, something like that, failed because they really don't want to do it. And when they do it, they do something really long so somebody can find them.
Somebody can find them, or they do it where they're thinking more about the future and where people will find them if they really want to go through it.
Right.
So they think like, I'm going to do it nice and clean in a bathtub or in bed, and I don't want people to worry about it. But men are like, they don't really care.
No, they get it done.
Or jump off
they get it
jump
done.
off a bridge or whatever.
Oh boy! All right. Moving into we were talking about the 1996 presidential inauguration. What about that?
Well, I was there, and I just thought it was pretty interesting. I've shook Bill Clinton's hand twice, so we were at that party. It was at the convention center, and just incredible amounts of security. I mean, it was amazing. There was basically an undercover cop/agent every 10 feet, so they had him. You would just be walking, and there'd be a guy just standing still. You walk another 5 feet in another direction, a guy standing still. 5 feet. They had them placed throughout the entirety of the convention center in a grid of every 5 feet, like a post, literally, like a post, a real post, and as a post for like an agent. And so people be dancing, and there'd be a guy standing right in the middle of them, not moving. So, it was.
But are you intimating that perhaps he had more protection because he was more loathsome or more loathed?
No, I think they all do. I think that they know to get away with what they've got to get away with, they have to have, Secret Service levels of security that the average person cannot even comprehend. They have thousands and thousands of people assuring their security. I took a tour. I was able to take a tour of the White House, so I went under the White House. I saw the bowling alley. I saw where there were the char marks where the White House was burnt down in 1812, and I was able to do that because relative. Well, I won't go into that, but essentially there is a level of protection at the White House that you would never know from the surface. Military, hardcore, intense, special forces security.
Okay, I'm just wondering if we had a dropout here in volume. I guess we're okay. You all right on that end?
What's that?
Okay, it's back. All right, no problem. I thought we had a little dropout there. No problem. There was something else supposedly going on underneath the White House, and maybe you can speak to this or you can't, but I'm just wondering because there was another death apparently attributed to somebody who knew too much during the Kennedy assassination. That information comes someplace into the White House, down in the basement or whatever, and that, again, those people are privy to information that nobody else is. And, of course, at those hours after Kennedy was shot, who knows what was going on, but somebody, I guess, who had access to something. Did you hear this story at all?
No, not familiar with it, but I know the cleanup job was more important than even killing Kennedy. After he died, they had to get rid of hundreds of people who knew too much, so... I don't know, 50, 100, I'm not really sure what the actual real number is, but it was a lot.
Yeah, and this old strange story about, and again, this is another, the fodder for 17 other shows, but the fact that he winds up going into the plane supposedly in one form, a casket or something like that, and comes out in another. At Bethesda, that's crazy.
There's so many problems with that story. It's not even arguable at this point. Anybody who gets up and says that he was shot by Oswald is either stupid, insane, or getting paid.
Interestingly, although apparently Caroline Kennedy did not at all want to give any kind of, imprimatur for the making of this last Kennedy series. Did you see this at all?
I'm not familiar with it.
All right, it came out a while ago, but apparently she wasn't really happy with it, and she chased it off a couple of networks. It finally wound up with Reelz, R-E-E-L-Z, that network. And, it was all right. It came out, and it kind of dealt with some of the seedy stuff, his assignations and all that other stuff. But it also, interestingly, it toed the line about Lee Harvey Oswald killing Kennedy. But the thing I always love about the portrayal of this is they got Lee eating and digesting a chicken lunch, a fried chicken dinner lunch. And I'm saying to myself, if I'm going to do something like that, are you kidding me? I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink. I'd be more hopped up than I was if I were going to play in the Super Bowl. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah, it's absurd. He had no idea what was coming.
No, okay, you're right.
The most important thing about the Kennedy assassination almost isn't even the assassination itself, which is important, but what led up and the characters who were involved. There's a lot of additional research that should be done about people like Dulles, Lansdale, Harrelson, all these other people who were all on the scene. I think I've heard it from your show where you said they were all there. It was like a crew of, dark actors. And
it was like, James Shelby Downer has done some work in this, and it gets a little bit out there. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just going to say it's out there. But that, how can I say it was almost like a carnival of killing.
Yeah.
Nixon was out there, lied about being there. Bush was there, lied about being there. J. Edgar Hoover was there. It was almost like they were there spectating, like
Johnson, like they all wanted him to go.
Yeah.
I think Kennedy sensed that it was going to happen. Like he fought against them. I think that the JFK and the Unspeakable is a terrific book and should be read by every American so they understand what Kennedy was really up against. It didn't happen out of the blue. He was fighting, for a kind of a somewhat corrupt and seedy individual. He's fighting the good fight. He really was trying to forestall what he saw as Armageddon, against a bunch of warmongering nut jobs in a lot of ways. Lemnitzer, Lansdale, these guys were destroyers of nations all around the world, and they finally turned upon themselves and did it to the United States.
The Dogs of War.
Yeah.
Can you mention that title?
Great movie, by the way.
You mentioned that book. Can you give us the book and author real quick, if you can?
Yeah, it's JFK and the Unspeakable. And the author is, let me find it. And it's really interesting. He took James Douglas is the author's name, James Douglas. But he researched a lot of the people who had their lives ruined because they knew too much. People who were so terrified of the mechanics of the police state that they were freaked out because they didn't expect anything like this could happen. They had nervous breakdowns or anxiety problems, and they were threatened, and people left the country, and all. There's just a wreckage that took place to ensure that the mythological story that JFK was shot by Oswald was maintained, and it's still kind of ongoing. I mean, you can see History Channel is just it's a joke. So you're talking about a 50-year myth, 50-year lie, the long con, so to speak.
And with 9/11, we're going to deal with that for 50 years, and more will come out. The more people are removed from the event, where those who were living during the time kind of have passed, their children, are now living. Two things seem to happen. One, more and more people who were involved talk about it, the real thing,
right.
And two, the more and more people are distanced from it, so that they really don't care about it. And in a sense,
right.
we're talking about like the sinking of the Maine, the Lusitania,
right.
Pearl
right.
Harbor.
Right.
If you were to talk about Pearl Harbor the way we do now, back in 1949, they'd kill you.
Kill you or jail.
Yeah.
Crazy farm.
Right.
You go to the rubber room and they give you a bunch of drugs and that'd be it. Oh, you're nuts.
But now, you can say it and it's like, that's a good point. It might be. That's just the way human nature is. But that, in fact, is how it is. All right.
Well, can you blame it? Do you know what it's like to go up against these myths? I mean, these people's lives are ruined if they're not killed. I mean, it's a horror show. I mean, I can see why people keep their mouths shut.
Well, but you see, that's priceless to what you just said. You're right. All the ones who want to maintain the status quo and such, they usually just, mouth off. It's like, okay, well, how do you keep such a thing quiet? And it's like, you have no idea, do you? You have no idea about how you can threaten things. Well, the mainstream media, they'll do what they're told to do. You only have to catch a couple of people at the top. Everything else is trickle down. So, you don't have to, scare the shit out of, 25, 30,000 people. All you got to do is catch some main people, and it goes down that this is what we're doing and this is what we're not doing.
All you got to do is you get all the sheep assembled, you pick one out, you slit its throat in front of everybody else, and everybody else
They get the idea. That's right.
Yep.
And I tell you what, you're right. You know what, William? It's true. Everybody thinks they're such, such studs. But if you were actually confronted with a situation like that, you know what? I don't blame people. It's absolutely upsetting, frightening, and, do you want to ruin your life, your wife's life, and the lives of your children? I understand.
No. Yeah. It's real. It's legit. I mean, America's run is with as tight a grip as Nazi Germany or Russia. It's just there's an illusion of freedom, and I don't know how people can buy that nonsense after the banking scam and 2 stolen elections and 9/11. But
well, I tell you what, stick around because you're going to find out they're going to sell this thing. I mean, I'm thinking to myself that when I look at it, I'm going, we can't repay this debt. I mean, this debt is astronomical. It's impossible. Okay, so I gather by your
they're using the debt as part of a tool in the New World Order to create change in conformance with their will. It's total bogusness. It's not based upon anything in reality, but people, because they've sucked up to this almighty dollar with a direct satanic symbol on the $1 bill. I mean, you want to talk about the utter cravenness and barrenness of Christianity. That satanic symbol with the eye and the triangle. Crowley, in one of his books, he wanted to be in contact with the devil, and the devil told him in one of his books, and this is what Crowley wrote, but he said to Crowley, the devil said, "I am the eye in the triangle." So you have a direct satanic, demonic symbol on the back of your dollar bill you're using, and you call yourself a Christian. Okay, yeah.
No, I'm fine with that, and maybe one day, I held off from this because we weren't addressing this, but I was saying, really we should go top down with all the imagery, the symbolism, the symbology of the buildings, the layouts of D.C., even the idea of Columbia and what that really means. I mean, it's laughable, and that's why.
And do it in a piece by piece, evidentiary fashion,
exactly,
with backup of pictures, and just lay it out. I mean, you have a huge Balaam right there, a huge, spire. I mean, and that's really what happens when you scratch the surface of D.C. As you see, it's all Masonic Illuminati. Anyway, the thing that's amazing is that they've had that symbol on the back of the dollar bill for 60 years, and the Christians aren't even. I mean, look, they don't even show it in church. You should be all like this. Look what this means. Do you know what this means? You're using currency that's based on this evil principle.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Since
anyway,
you brought it up,
that's a whole different story.
Okay. All right, another rant that we love from William Ramsey. But I will also, add this to it too. From what I can see in Scripture, especially, and I'm looking at the New Testament because I think that the Old Testament isn't completely vacated, but sometimes it's pulled out when it really doesn't apply. But here's the thing: with Jesus, what he said to the centurions, like, get that coin out of here. Two things: one, I'm not of this world, and secondly, he did not. The Lord, Jehovah would never have had money. Are we agreed on that?
Yeah, there's at least you can be. Deride the Muslims for whatever they want, but there's no usury, and the Christians don't seem to get that. So, and even the original church was, they disparaged the use of money. They tried to share everything they could, and that's the whole confrontation between Peter and Ananias. So, there was this move towards the way that money is used to create hierarchy, and that's in a really authentic Christian community. There's a lot more financial equality than there is in our society.
I would say that's the epitome of it. Balances and scales, and even though metals were used, fine. But to take something, to make something the representation of something else, that's where the usury comes in. And, of course, this goes back, and I don't know if you've ever read this, and folks, also, this can still be had online. The Babylonian Woe by David Astle. Are you familiar with that at all, William?
I'm familiar with the book. I haven't read it, unfortunately.
It just shows you right from the very beginning how they were scamming people. It started off as a good thing, as most things do in the human condition, and then it becomes corrupted. But it's the old story about money. All right, so here's where I'm going with this. Money is not of God. We use it. He understands it. He knows that we're in the system, but not of the system. But when Christians freak out about the taking away of "in God we trust" off currency, I'm like, man, get it out of there. Are you kidding me? The Lord doesn't want that there. And you're just right. How can both evil and the Lord reside in the same place? On a dollar bill, it's horrible. Like you said, you got the truncated eye extended over the pyramid. You've got in other places, and are you familiar with the owl in the upper right-hand corner?
Yeah, the owl's there. Well, the eye is apparently the eye of Horus in their symbology, and the triangle represents the Kabbalah. Triangle always has represented the Kabbalah, and that's why all these guys love the Kabbalah. But just like Crowley and all these other people on the left-hand path.
What I wanted to mention to you at lunchtime at the bureau, they had a little veranda you could walk out on, which was above Pennsylvania Avenue, and I could look to my right, which would be the east, and there's Osiris's prosthetic penis right there, 555 feet of it. And then I would look to my left, and there would be the Capitol Dome, the female. And on top of it was the goddess.
Persephone.
What was this?
Persephone, right?
Is that what they call it? Tell me about that.
Well, it's Persephone. It's the goddess of the underworld. She's facing west.
East.
It's not. Yeah, it's some kind of goddess.
Well, I'll tell you what. What's interesting is if you go to Wikipedia, which is nothing but another vanilla-sized encyclopedia, forget it. I mean, they'll never go into this. They talk about that the topping of the dome, that is the Statue of Freedom, which is baloney. Now, I got this biography of Garfield, James Garfield, and he was in D.C. as a congressman before he became president, and they had redone the Capitol Dome, And on top of it, and this is what the book says, and the book was written like in 72, it said on top of it was placed the goddess of freedom. Goddess of peace, sorry. Goddess of peace.
God.
So I'm laughing because now if you go to Wikipedia, it talks about the Statue of Freedom. That was not what it was made. That's not what it was, called. So you look to the right and you got the prosthetic. You look to the left and you got the Goddess of Peace. And it's like, oh my goodness. I mean, does it get any better than that? No, it doesn't. Jeez. But anyway, that's...
Yeah, and then there's still a statue of Albert Pike out there that's been there forever. So,
All I want to know, do the pigeons crap equally on his statue as they do
yeah, I hope so.
in Lafayette?
The Capitol Dome building, this is right from the internet, it's Persephone, goddess of the underworld, goddess of death.
You got that off the internet. All right, beautiful. What site was that?
I mean, that doesn't mean it's true, but that's my understanding.
Well, I have no problem with that. I mean, when I look at the book itself, like, Garfield, I'm thinking, well, that was period, and that's what they called it, so let's not call it the Statue of Freedom because that's all baloney. And, of course,
Right.
we have the statue out in New York Bay, which also is very interesting. But I want, I'm going to take you down
What's
there.
that statue in New York Bay? What's that? Duh.
The Statue
well,
of Liberty.
There's another one in Jersey that's this weird statue that commemorates some guy's death, and he's being shot in the back by a lightning bolt or something like that. Doesn't that sound right?
Well, I've been in Jersey. I saw a lot of weird things. That one escaped me. You got to tell me about that one.
Well, I have to figure that out.
Right,
I saw it
yeah.
just recently. Well, that'll be another discussion.
It could have been a couple of mob guys. I don't.
Yeah, who knows?
All right, moving along because we are taking a couple of sidebars, which I love. But you talk about surveillance, counter surveillance, and also meeting with good old spooks and spies.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of the people I grew up with, a lot of them, were in D.C. They worked for, places like, they became spies. A lot of them went into work for the government, and in a variety of different levels. And also my involvement in a very small way with Vince Foster's, killing subjected me to a lot of these guys. There are people who who it was surprising that they came and tried to, I don't know, I wouldn't say set up, but they wanted to investigate me without saying you're under investigation. So the first guy they sent was a Maronite Christian, so he was from Lebanon.
Okay.
And I didn't know what his story was, but where I was studying, he'd always be there while I was studying. And I learned later he tried to befriend me, and we became friends, and I said, well, you're from Lebanon, let's go. There's a very famous restaurant in D.C. called the Lebanese Taverna. There's two of them. There's one in Northern Virginia, and there's one in North D.C. And I said, well, let's go out to eat there, and he wouldn't want to go there, which was unusual. I was like, well, you're Lebanese, but I didn't put it together. Well, I was coming back from Georgetown, walking back across the Key Bridge, and I ran into him with another group of Arabs, and I started to put it together that he really wasn't, some guy. He was actually an agent of some sort, and he was infiltrating and investigating people for the government. He spoke great English. He spoke perfect Arabic, and he probably had a number of tasks that he, would just go around and try to befriend people and take notes on them and see who they were and, identify a threat. And, I was no threat. I've never had a gun, so, I mean, the reason that they wanted to investigate me was, and he probably didn't know, he's probably compartmentalized, he didn't know exactly the whole, my situation, but he was probably just taking notes and building a dossier, and that's the way it really works. I mean, that's essentially it. I mean, if you come out and you are part of something that's a threat to the ruling families or the ruling elite or somebody who knows too much, that's how they kind of make a determination of what you're really about. And I was pretty surprised that I was on somebody's list because I didn't really consider myself, I still don't, an organized person. I'm not political. I'm not part of any groups or communities. And I really have never even gotten off that list, sadly to say. It's been 15 years, but they seem to think that, I'm a person of interest. And, it's been kind of interesting. I've burned a lot of, and I won't go into detail, but I've burned a lot of spooks from the United States government over time, 15 years. once you've kind of learned them, and not learned them, but they operate in the same manner. They're a little too ingratiating. They show up at places where you're at, and I can smell a government spook a mile away at this point. It's been so long for me. So anyway, that's my experience with the police state. So I unfortunately I don't have a really good opinion of a lot of these acronym agencies.
No.
After my experiences, because they're propping up just incredibly evil murders and assassinations and poisonings and corporate fraud and political fraud of the first order. And it's pretty sick. I don't know how these people, they probably have thrown all their mirrors out of the rooms of their houses. I don't know how they can look at themselves. I mean, they're just absolutely disgusting people.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's a keeper statement. You're absolutely right. They threw the mirrors out. Absolutely. Great statement. Yeah, you have to cease to be who you are. You can't be, you can't look anymore.
How can you do that? I mean, they're picking up a check just like, I mean, I'm a nobody. I mean, I'm not that important person. What are you wasting your time with me? So they know that they're just doing their job to get, pensions and benefits and doing this. I mean, it's insane. And they're propping up these evil people who were involved in murder and assassination and drug dealing and corporate fraud. I mean, it's unreal.
I'll say this: I didn't have a lot of contact with people I guess considered dangerous that I knew about, much like you. And of course, I was single at the time, and I was just like crashing through life. And we went to a party. I don't even know why we went there. I mean, I had a roomie at that time when I was living in Alexandria in Rose Hill, if you remember that, Franconia Road.
I'm familiar with that.
All right, and
spent a lot of time in Alexandria.
So we go to I don't know where we were. We were someplace in the suburbs of Maryland, outside of D.C. And that's the other thing I'm going to tell you. To this day, they tell me Boston's bad, but I mean I always got lost in D.C. I mean southeast, northwest. I don't know where I am.
Yeah, it's really confusing because the way the roads are built.
Always laid out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we wind up going to this party, and I mean I'm just getting the glow on. And and we're talking to some people, and somebody comes up and says, "Look, that guy, you see this guy there?" And some guy was there with this like black, kind of like Clint Eastwood leather hat, with a vest on, and I don't know. And I'm like, "You don't mess with him," I'm like, "Oh yeah." Well, one, why would I? And two, okay, so what are you telling me? He's somebody. I mean, I'll take your word for it. And I remember we went out for some more booze and stuff, and I'm like driving through these streets, going, "Why am I here? I don't belong here. I don't even like this place." So D.C. definitely has, a certain allure for some, but some other people just, kind of rear their back like a cat because of what takes place there.
Yeah, I just remember there's a story about Bill Clinton when he first came to D.C. I can't remember what he was there for, but where he ran up onto the mall, near the end of the mall, near the Lincoln Memorial. And it's a vignette. I think it's from Partners in Power, which is a really important book I would read. But it talks about Bill and Hillary back in Arkansas, but Clinton was had some kind of Rocky moment in Philadelphia where he thrust his arms up and said, "I love this city. I love this city." He just loved D.C. And I think that's a fairly telling, tale about his character.
Or lack thereof.
Well, indeed.
All right, to give you a little heads up, I don't know how much time you got, and I thank you for the time that you're giving us. Two things. One, and I'll lay them out right now, very interesting that you mentioned about Robert Rubin at the Model UN. And then after that, and this one cracks me up because this is such an insidious thing, what you refer to is the law school at U of Chicago East. So if we can take them top to bottom, what about the UN model? What's that about?
Well, I just remember, so Model UN was for kids all over the United States, the Model UN is an organization where they try to pull the best and the brightest out and indoctrinate them with the whole ideas of the UN. And they pull out, the best of the brightest, supposedly from the best of the brightest, to, teach them about the UN. It's a total New World Order indoctrination thing. So I went to this one event. I was much more naive back then, so I didn't see the big picture. Mm-hmm. And I thought, this is a prestigious place. So we went to, I think it's the Washington Hotel where Reagan got shot. And they had, to cover up the crime scene, they redid the whole front of the hotel. So you can't really tell the whole situation where the whole event went down. is totally different. It doesn't look like anything that happened, when the event happened. They didn't seal it in time. They actually recreated the whole architecture of the entryway.
Mm-hmm.
And so that should tell you a little bit. But I just recall being there and how interesting it was, and all these best of the brightest, these young kids, naive, getting indoctrinated. But guess who was there? Was Robert Rubin, who was the Secretary of the Treasury at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remarked, well, one was that he's very short and swarthy,
mm-hmm.
which, was interesting. And he had two bodyguards around him that they didn't look like military people. They looked like Italian gangster thugs. They were big, fat, pasta-eating bullies. And I just thought and he walked with the most pompous air. He was very he had that kind of peacock strut
mm-hmm.
for a short guy. And he'd walk down these hallways with his two bodyguards at his right and his left. And, people would get out of his way, and he just loved the whole, kingly strut down the center
mm-hmm.
of these big corridors at the hotel. But, and his whole, he's part of the whole banking scam and scandals. And on a global sense, he's definitely involved in, making these changes throughout our whole global society by screwing up the banking system. And I just remember that vignette, and it was the bully, mob feel. It wasn't
mm-hmm.
some kind of nerdy, detached bean counter at all. It was more of like, this guy's connected. That's the way I felt about it back then, and now I see it in clear colors that Rubin is something else.
There's probably a little Napoleon complex going on there too, don't you think?
Yeah. He couldn't be over 5'2".
Is there? There was a word for that, but I won't.
They're all short. So is Geithner. So is Bernanke. They're all these short. I mean, I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, go say it. I know you were going to say. Oh, I have to laugh because I'm looking at this. I'm envisioning this, and that is like, the smaller the chore, the bigger the bodyguards. Just so you have to have that little compensation going on.
Yeah, but the funny thing about the bodyguards is they were had big stomachs, their shirts didn't tuck in right, and the ties weren't put on properly. It was just, these weren't guys from the FBI. This was
no.
It was something else.
And those telling Red Linguini stains on their tie. That's the best. Yeah. Oh Lord. Okay. Now moving on, because this I find really interesting. Probably one of the institutions that has gone without much notice in the Patriot alternative community, which is supposed to get up, be hip to everything. And that is the University of Chicago, where a lot of, I guess, what we're dealing with right now, a lot of social engineering, mind manipulation takes place. And you talked about this as the U of Chicago East. Do you want to tell us about that?
Well, my law school was very right wing. So when I made a choice to go to school, I just went to the best law school I could get into, the cheapest. So I wanted to go to a state school, and I went. When I first started, they hit us with this kind of idea of law and economics, where a lot of people might be surprised on what their judicial representatives are really thinking, but they hit us with this notion where the ideals of justice, equity, and equality under the law are tied to economic principles. And so they really just hit us with these we started in these classes that were, I think it was a constitutional law, with this notion of this law and economics. We were hit with these ideas from people who are on the circuit courts right now, like the head of the Yale Law School, a guy's named you probably don't know him, Guido Calabresi and Richard Posner. And it was pretty shocking how quick they wanted us just to absorb these doctrines, and it wasn't an objective and these are fairly recent doctrines, and the subtext of the notion is that all legal rights are monetized. It's really an argument about money, not an argument about ideals, and I think that was the disgusting thing that they hit us with, where nobody in our school, we're all, what the hell is going on? We're all fairly intelligent people scratching our heads, what are they teaching us? This doesn't have anything to do with criminal procedure, so these all get traced back to kind of notions from Rockefeller and University of Chicago, Posner's, University of Chicago professor, and he wrote the book on law and economics, so they had us reading that as well, and he's very influential. And Richard Posner, I've seen him get up and, toe the company line about terrorism and, Al-Qaeda and all this stuff. So,
but you raise a couple of good points. Now, I assume you know. I don't know that you do. But, I've had the works of the informant, James Montgomery. The informant has come on and done audio with me. We've also kept the work that he's done literarily along with Montgomery. And this falls right in line, though. Because, actually, if you think back to it scripturally as well, and that is the law of the world isn't really anything except mercantile law. Right. Like you just said, your statement about what? Monetizing liberty? Is that?
Yeah, monetizing ideals. That's the whole thing. So if somebody goes in front of a court and they're asking for justice or they want something fair, the way that they're training you is that they're actually just asking for money in some ways. And, it's not that simple.
No, right.
Essentially it breaks down into that type of thing where they're infusing this notion of economy or money into the legal system where I don't think it should be. It's really not. But, and that's this is a classic view of a financial or moneyed elite. People with money think that everything's about money and, oh, you're really not arguing about this. You want to take my money. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and if you
don't want justice, you want to take what I've got.
Well, that's the whole story about victory. Well, it's law of conquest, and that's where I'm going with to a certain extent. I've done this work. I also had a lawyer on that was defending a person that needed defending in a copyright infringement suit, and the patriots were all yelling that this is a First Amendment suit. And I talked to the lawyer. He's a decent guy. They took it pro bono. I just one of the lawyers I find that I kind of like. But I asked him also. I said, "Look, you're in copyright law. In this case, you're finding that there was a certain infringement by a plaintiff that really wasn't. But the thing is, I had to write an article about this, and the patriots took it as a First Amendment situation, and I'm like, no, it's not. It is about it's a tort, right? It's about contract. It's contract law. And I asked the lawyer, I said, is it not true that private people cannot use the Constitution as a remedy or a protection in federal court? And eventually get around to the point saying, yes, that is true. In other words, the Constitution we think we have, and you'll understand this, although many Christians don't. And I'm not trying to, kind of shoehorn you into somewhere you don't want to go. This is the first you've ever heard of it. My point is, no. The Constitution is not for us. It was a compact struck by the Founding Fathers to tie in the federal government with the several states at the time. It still goes. And he admitted that, yes, this was not a First Amendment case. It was basically a contract case. And that's, well, yeah, and again, with these emails I'm getting lately, all kind of going along with a theme, which I find absolutely fascinating. It's like, look, the conquerors or your government, whatever you want to call it, can set up anything it wants to. It can also not give you what it says it sets up. My point in the United States today, you can talk, all right, the only time I really think you get constitutional protection is in a capital offense. But when you get into these other things, it's all about the contract, admiralty, rules, and that's the way it goes. So when these patriots that I've seen throughout the last 10 years go to the court, they go into a federal case, whatever, probably tax evasion, and they use the Constitution as a defense, the judge rightfully tells them, you can't do it, get that out of here. And that individual, David Kerr, who worked for Santangelo Law Firm in Colorado, did a great job, won one for the good guys, he really did. And now that you know law as well, but he finally had to do with it, he goes, yes, not that he was like, stonewalling me, he just kind of like smiling, he said, yes, you're right. Private citizens are not a party to the Constitution. That's really slippery stuff, but it goes back to what you were saying. We're dealing pretty much, and William, I'm going to let you coin this the way you want to, but we're dealing with an illusion. What is really law except what, the rulers say it is? And they can
they have to be agreement. They have to have agreement that
there
this
you
is
go.
law. There's
That's
people
right.
at the top who don't give a crap about it, and they rule the country like, Roman prelates or something like that, then you're in trouble because you think you're operating on one set of rules and they don't care about them. So,
But are we not in a situation where I think actually we're seeing that? I think it's the new Rome.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
This country's ruled by, families. It's really ruled by people with money, families. The politicians are their lackeys. They groom them, they put them in power, and, they run it for their own benefit, and it's essentially a financial benefit. And they have contempt for the average person, middle class, lower class, and it's the same way they ruled it in Rome. It's essentially the United States is the new Rome.
I'm going to lay this on you, and then also I want, if you will, to make a parting comment. I thank you for the time that you've given us. And, I could go on forever, as you well know, and we don't need to do that. But before I throw it over to you for a final comment, with all you've seen, you were in D.C., you saw what was going on, you realized what the animals are really like. But, aren't we looking – okay, now that kind of tones my question. But let me just lay it out straight. I look at what we live in and what and it's so ironic because in another day we're going to be celebrating something I don't really know we should be celebrating, and that's independence. And I'm like, no, I don't really think that happened. But the way of the world, and as you've seen in the District of Columbia, is actually, and you've touched upon this a couple of times, as being business. I just look at this as being mercantilism and all the other trappings. People can make dances about it. They can make good, funny stories about it, liberty and all that. So, when you came away from there, just share with us, if you will, what your notions of the way things really are as opposed to what we were taught in our history books, if that makes it a little clearer.
Well, I think that the reality is that D.C. is run a lot different than what you're taught. People who really run it are, what could be called the global Masonic Illuminati, Mystery Babylon stripe, and they rule it the way they want to. And if you're an outsider, you will never get inside unless you abide by their rules. And that's probably the same way it is at the Vatican and their rules, and the City of London and their rules. And it's unfortunate, and you don't want to believe the lies. I think that the unfortunate reality is that we're in a school or scholastic system that is based upon myths. And, the sooner that you can break away from those myths, the better you'll be. And I wouldn't be naive about what you think it takes to make political change. And, the Tea Partiers and all these people who are following people like the Pied Piper Glenn Beck, who's from Yale, which should tell you something right there, are naive. The real political change, if you want to make it just a change in yourself, it's a economic and spiritual change you make in what you decide to do with your time. And I wouldn't waste it thinking you're going to make it on a wide level. If you really want to make change, get out of the banking system. Don't get in debt, And, that's the thing. If they can't touch you and then get into your finances and your brain and make you believe lies, you're doing good for yourself, I guess. So I titled this thing when I sent it to you by email was, DC, this house is haunted, and I do think it's haunted. It's haunted by ghosts and spooks, and it might as well be a white and sepulcher, sepulcher of there's a lot of dead people there that, shouldn't have been killed through wars and political assassinations and, business combinations that, resulted in the deaths of a lot of people. There's one part we didn't go over in the tobacco. When I was working as a clerk, I also worked for a law firm where, during the tobacco litigation of the 90s that, resulted in the deaths of millions because the government was subverted by these tobacco companies from putting correct labeling on their products that said that, they were essentially doping tobacco, and that's the movie The Insider, essentially, is that they were adding all kinds of products to, make it more addictive, and millions of people have died and lived miserable deaths after, their lungs failed to work, and D.C. went hand in hand with them, so I just don't think people should be naive. I was totally naive, so that's a little long-winded, but...
No, but as a kid, I remember asking certain questions of my teachers and parents, and they seemed ill-equipped to answer, and I understand that because basically they towed the party line and what we were told. So I can't fault them for that, and I don't. But one of the things I said out of this naivete, which is as innocent as heck and also is very accurate, I mean, when I was learning about lobbyists, I would say to like my history teacher, like, isn't that like bribery? You know what I mean? It is.
It is.
Anywhere else, it's called bribery, and we don't call it that. And those are the things. And what happens? The teacher does a hobbit, and comes up with something. But you're a kid. You want to go back and play football and kiss girls and stuff like that, so you don't give a crap. But that stays with you, and you never revisit it to a certain extent. And if you do, there's always something more elevated at that time because your brain is more evolved, where you say, okay. No, it's not good. It's bribery. This should not be happening. Get those lobbyists out of D.C., but that's the way it goes. That's the way of the world. And you've mentioned a couple of times, and I'll bring you back to that as well, and that is, it seems to me, and that's how I email people also. Look, I'd love to believe the John Wayne stories and all that stuff, but you know what?
Right.
It's business, man. It's business.
It all is.
And it comes down.
Well, it's just like the mafia. It's a form of the mafia.
You got
it. Like what they said on the Corleones. This is not about killing. It's about business.
It's not personal. It's business.
Yep. Without said, with William Ramsey, and he's given us, what are we working on here? Over 90 minutes. And thank you for doing it.
Sure.
It's not without a certain amount of consternation on your part, but I really, as you well know, value your input, and I think people should do so as well for what you've done, and there's more coming down the road. And forgive me, but let me ask you, with what we're talking about now, and it's pretty sensitive, have you ever thought that you might turn this into either a documentary in print or visually?
Well, not really, actually. I had a lot of reservations about talking about my times in D.C. It's still kind of a sensitive issue, and some of those people are still around. But it's I could. I think that most of my stuff can be verified, and I kind of went over some things from that everybody kind of knows about anyway from my own angle. But I have a lot of other projects that I'm working on. I'm putting one together called Elite Perversion, Past and Present. So it'll show that, what's happening today is part of a continuum, and that's what happens when societies go wrong. And so, I've got other projects, and, I'm going to try to re-edit my book and put it for more of a overtly Christian perspective, and, then maybe some Christians will get it. A lot of them think that I'm writing like some pro-Crowley book.
Oh, I know.
Even though I use the word evil, but whatever. I don't know. You have to kind of talk to people in their own nomenclature to get them to understand, I guess.
Well, you don't have my problems with the situation. I just want people to be, truthful with me, but that's a hard thing to come by. And I'm no saint. There's no two ways about it. But sometimes I think you just got to call a snail, and I don't think that happens much anymore. But I will say this, and I'm interested by this. I mean, what impacted me made me go more to do this like, radio type of thing, which will start actually its 10th year in about 2 weeks.
Good for you. Congratulations.
Well,
that's an accomplishment.
Well,
tough road. You're certainly not monetizing all your work. So. You're not Alex Jones.
No, buy my video. All right.
Yeah. Well, we could do like 10 breaks and have a guy come on for 10 minutes and talk about the efficacy of buying gold.
Well, but in a sense though too, I don't mind when. All right, look. Okay. To me, this was an easier way to do. It was a little bit more financially. Well, it ruined me less than if I were to try to do other things. But in the sense, also, you've done things too, and you've done them. You put them up for a price, and I think that's very fair. But what I want to ask you though also is, although what I was motivated by made me go to the radio thing with a partner who still is an acquaintance of mine, but who no longer shares this, and I'm indebted so much to him. But what I want to ask you, too, is like one day, actually, you got hit and said you want to do this. Can I ask you what that moment was when you said, look, I just got to bust out with this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was just I had enough. Like I was a solo researcher, some guy in his own, small space researching. I got to the point where, it really was the connections between Crowley and 9/11 that really made me turn the, corner, and I had a dark night of the soul, and unfortunately, it was years and years long. And I just said, you know what, I have to do this, do the right thing. It's really a real spiritual thing. I wish I didn't have to monetize it, I'm not living in a big palatial mansion, I can assure you. I haven't made that much money off of what I've done. I'm still working on it. I'm doing it solo myself, but I think it was the Crowley thing that really saw it as, these events are spiritual. It's an evil event, and
yes,
I'm disgusted and sickened by the inability of the ostensible church establishment, and I mean this on a global level. I'm not talking about even the United States or anything, but can't you see it? And that's why I, want to tell this truth to people who will listen. And there's not that many out there, unfortunately. And a lot of people won't take the time, or I haven't couched my work in, like I said earlier, the nomenclature of what people understand. Unfortunately, they think that, they won't take the time to read or listen to a radio program or try to understand what I'm getting at. But, that was really it. So I think that I'm trying to, fight the good fight my way. I'm not any saintly person or anything by any means, but, I just had enough. I'm disgusted. And, I think that the obeisance of all these Christians and all these people who talk about law and justice and order are just straw dust. It's disgusting. So I'm hopefully making people aware, and I want them to face the reality of what's happening and what has happened, and, not lie to themselves.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm no stranger to a controversy, and not for the sake of such, but I also agree with you. There is a very phony and very well-crafted connection between government and Christianity, and I think it goes back to a time that no longer is with us. There was a time when the state and the church were one, and that was because of Jehovah's Law. Things have changed, and we are in a point now where there was a departure because, let's face it, his people did not want to be ruled by divine law. They kind of wanted monarchs like the people next door. And here we are. Here we are with presidents and prime ministers. And it's so rich because we are doing this show so close to July 4th. And the point is, no, I mean, the way of the world, as Scripture told us, is not about government. It's about, it's about obedience to God's word, and that is not what government is about anymore. There is a vast, vast vacuum between both. And you've seen it. I mean, you've talked about it. You've mentioned it. And I'm sitting there, and the other day, by the way, I got to tell you, William, when Michelle Bachmann is like coming out of the gate real strong. She's not going to be around the end. This is the same old stuff. But she said, God told me to run for office, and in the sleepy mornings, when the Today Show just comes on, in bed, I looked at my wife and I went, "No way."
Yeah. Well, didn't George Bush Jr. say that? Oh. Didn't say God wanted him to run? Didn't he say that? I'm almost positive he uttered those exact same words.
William,
that guy is about as Luciferian as you can get.
Oh.
Go back and if you want to have a bad trip, go back and listen to his 2000 inauguration and look at it with the eye through the lens of Crowley. I mean, it's astonishing what he said. I'm
choking on my laughter because I'll tell you what I did. I'll send this to you too, damn if I can find it. I took a transcription. I paid ABC their morning show when Charlie was still there, when he had an interview with Bush. And Bush was being asked questions by Charlie. Of course, Gibson, I'm sure, didn't know what he was asking. And I tell you what, the things that Shrub said, Little Bush, about his knowledge of God, it was like, I would say that a third grader in Sunday school would have said like, "Oh man, what are you talking about?" Oh, I mean, if I can find that thing, I'll send it to you. Damn, I don't know if I saved it because I changed my computer, and I don't know if that made the cut as far as bringing that over. But, I mean, I send it to Christians, and they'll still look at that and look at me, and they get mad at me.
Yeah.
I'm like, what are you talking about? He was saying stuff about, those who are in Islam, we all go to God. We just take different paths. No, wrong. Islam ain't going to cut it. I'm sorry, but, I mean, Judaism is going to cut it. And we won't go into that whole thing, but, you're absolutely right. I mean, he was the biggest fraud that ever trod the earth as president, and people think he is just the absolute glowing And he's the best thing that can...
unreal. They have been conned. It is a great deception. And the fact that Christians are believing that is a direct contravention to the words of Jesus Christ, where he said, "Be not deceived."
Gee, you're more on my side than I thought you were. No, I agree.
Why do you think we hooked up? Nobody else will listen to me. I only go on like 5-10 shows. Most of the other people, they won't even listen to me. I had to struggle to get an interview with Kevin Barrett, and he's still... this guy's ostensibly a Muslim who believes in, God, Satan, cosmology. He's kind of not really quite on board with what I'm saying, so...
Holy mackerel, I didn't even know that took place. Okay, well, I mean, look...
Yeah, well, you can look it up. Go to Kevin Barrett's thing. I was on there for 1 hour.
And folks, also, by the way, I mean, again, you can search William Ramsey for whatever shows he's popped up on. Of course, we kind of care about what we do, and I say we, and that with Gordon and with Randy and a couple of others close by. And like I said, as I wrote you, and it's true. I mean, we just dig what you do. And we know that it comes at a certain price, no doubt about it, but I think also, I don't know, I think we sleep a little bit better because of it. That's the way I think about it. So the best to you and your family. Listen, thanks a lot for coming on at this time, for this length. And just stay with us one more second, if you will, William. You've been listening to thinkorbeaten.com. We thank you all for being with us. Have a safe holiday, all that other stuff. By the time you hear this, of course, it'll always be over. But thanks again, folks, and come back soon.